Meanwhile, you are taking your seats. I'd like to tell you that we also had a little lottery as part of the enrollment, and the lottery was about if you enroll on time, you can win books about behavioral economics. We have informed all the winners by email, and after the seminar, please come down and pick up your wins. I hope you enjoyed your ice cream. Today's last presentation will be held by Dr. Pelle Guldborg Hansen, straight from Copenhagen, Denmark. He is behavioral researcher and director of the Initiative of Science, Society and Policy at Roskilde University and the University of Southern Denmark. He is the chairman of Danish Nudging Network, which connects more than 60 governmental institutions, municipalities, universities, organizations, and businesses. He is also one of the initiators of very soon to be established the European Nudge Network. After he was awarded the PhD degree in 2010, he has worked with real-world applications of behavioral economics, especially so-called nudge interventions within a wide range of arenas. His research and work have been reported by The Economist, Foreign Policy, New Scientist, Policy Options, and CNN.com. According to Hansen, the core motivation of his research and work is the attempt to empower citizens and refocus their social responsibilities and behavior in an increasingly complex democratic society. Based on that, I think he would fit very well in our think tank. So if you ever get fired, you're always welcome to work with us. But I don't think he will have that problem. But thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Welcome, Dr. Hansen.
Thank you. Well, I can always quit my job, right? I'm just going to run you briefly through what is going on in the Nordic countries. There was all these titles that what you get when you get not paid that much in salary, then you get these titles for free. But given that we have just had a coffee break, I thought that I would begin by explaining very quickly a little bit about nudging relative to coffee breaks. So this is from an experiment we did in the Danish Opera last year. There were 550 CEOs attending this conference. Sometimes people say this thing about nudging really only works on people who are not that well off or not well educated. So we brought some nudges into this particular context. And what we did was we wanted to focus on the really important stuff. So this is 3 o'clock in the morning. The team is discussing what to do and what to work at. Actually, we knew that at that point, of course. But what we're discussing is something very serious in our modern lives, namely tables. And we have, just in this room, which are not fit for tables, there are 3 tables on the stage, and usually most of us knows how to use a table, but we know very little about how tables influences our behavior. This is a particularly dangerous table that we're talking about, namely the coffee break table, which features, in this case, brownies in front, and then we have the obligatory healthy option, which are apples in the back. Now, from the perspective of a behavioral scientist, this is a nutritional catastrophe. Because we know various things about human behavior, which makes this look like a very bad idea. First of all, if things are in the front of a table, we tend to take more of that. The things that dominate the visual field, we tend to take more of that. Then apples, we really don't like to eat them in public settings. They're better than oranges because we have to peel oranges, and they're definitely better than coconuts. But eating an apple in a public setting means taking out large chunks and then having the mouth full and juice running down the chin. So we tend to avoid eating whole apples in public settings. So what we did was just to devise a standard experiment where we had the control buffet in one end of the opera, and then we have a rearranged buffet in the other end of the opera. Then we had the whole team of 16 persons dressing up as waiters. 2 people were assigned to make sure that nobody wandered in between the 2 buffets. And of course, we couldn't randomize in this case, so it was a field experiment, but we did various things to make sure that we ended up having the equal number almost in each group. Then we this was the intervention table, right? That's not the standard one. The standard one is actually served 10,000 times an hour in Western Europe. So it makes one of the main foraging ground for office people. But this was the table that we set up, and you can see the differences right away. There's cake in the back, apples in the front. Cakes have been cut up in half, and apples have been cut up into kindergarten-style slices. And then in the visual field, apples dominate, which is contrary to the usual thing. So after 14 minutes, all the CEOs goes in, and down comes the teams. They're counting, and we have, because we work in so many areas in my team, we always have a professor in that particular area with us, so that's the food professor. And then, of course, we do the calculations. And in this particular case, we found for this coffee break that when we looked at the control, it was just as we predicted. A lot of cake was eaten, not that much apple was eaten. This is intake relative to a whole piece of cake and a whole apple per person. Then when we look at the intervention buffet, well, we have an increase. It jumps a bit on the PC, I can see, of 84% in apple intake, and we have a decrease of 30% in the intake of brownies, right? And then sometimes there's a doctor in the room when we present this stuff at nutritional conferences saying, well, apples can be bad for you as well if you eat a lot of them. So we took the recipes and the sort of apples and we calculated it into nutritional groups. And then more importantly, of course, what did this mean in energy intake? In this case, it was for the control. The average person had an intake of 1,600 kilojoules, and in the intervention, well, it had a reduction of more than 400 kilojoules in the intervention group per person. So, since I'm not the food professor, I don't know what this means, but he calculated it for me, and it amounts 400 kilojoules amounts to approximately playing frisbee for 40 minutes or kissing for 2 hours, which is really, really difficult to get a bunch of CEOs doing on a cold winter day. But the important thing is that this actually addresses a serious problem, because 400 kilojoule, a reduction of 400 kilojoule on average per day per person in a Western European country amounts to solving a very important issue, namely the obesity epidemic. Of course, I said the average person, so there was a lot of things going on there, but don't think about that. But that was the point about small changes can add up to solve really big problems. And I thought, since you had just been at the coffee break, I'll just add this deck of slides. And I saw those of you who actually took several pieces of bread out there, and I really hope you will relax later today. Also, this intervention that I just showed you is what it qualifies as what we call a nudge, and it has been said a couple of times today. And often, when this concept is introduced into a new area, people start thinking like, "What is this? I need some kind of shorthand for a nudge," so it becomes a loving push or something like that. But there is actually some reason to pay attention to the details. We won't do it today, but there are some really great insights to gain from studying technicalities to a certain extent. But just the shorthand would be today, a nudge is an umbrella term for any attempt at influencing people's behavior in a predictable way, because we do work with hypotheses. And then they function independently of limiting the original choice set or making alternatives appreciably more costly in terms of time, trouble, social sanctions, and so forth. This is not the exact same definition that you can find in the Nudge book by Thaler and Sunstein, but it is more precise. As you can also see, this means actually taking the economists and putting them on the sideline, as well as the lawyers in administration. So that I don't mind doing that. But it also these two conditions, and I don't know why they're saying 1 and 1. This is when you go from a Mac to a PC, certain things happen. But these two negative conditions, actually, they're negative conditions in the sense that they don't tell us what a nudge is. It says what it isn't. So when we look at what it is intervention based on the assumption that cognitive, and I'm sorry about the flaws, this was written for a philosophical audience originally, that cognitive flaws exist and often affect individual and social decision-making, and making use of these flaws as an integral part of such attempts. So as you just saw, insights into how people actually choose food from a table, and then using those insights to promote the healthy choice can actually have a huge individual impact. So, for those of you who don't know it, you might want to look into the literature, and often nudge is very often associated with behavioral economics, which is fair and true, but there's also some good reasons to pay much attention, like you also said, to cognitive psychology, social psychology, and in particular something called cognitive design. These 4 disciplines are basically the core disciplines within creating and working with this type of interventions. If we look a couple of years ahead, then we won't be talking about nudges anymore, I think. I think we will be more likely to talk about applied behavioral science. It's a more fitting term, and it's less posh. So that's what you should be searching for when you use Google. The question then is, how do behavioral economics and nudges work in the Nordic countries? And of course, there are some cultural variances to take into the picture, but basically, on a theoretical level, nudges work like everywhere else. But we are, in the Nordic countries, characterized by certain things. First and foremost, we have dense regulation compared to other countries. And then the next thing is that we have massive data on citizens. And this is actually really good if you want to conduct these randomized controlled trials. It means that we often in the Nordic countries have some really good databases from the beginning. It also gives a little cautionary note on what we might term overreach, because we already feel in the Nordic countries that the state is allowed to intervene quite far into our lives. This might add to a certain overreach for some. But what is happening in the Nordic countries, though, then when we have some good preconditions for doing this, what is happening out there? Well, in Norway, there's something called green nudge, and they're concentrating on sustainability issues, if you couldn't guess that. And then in Trondheim, we have the municipality of Trondheim setting up a nudge unit, actually. But what exactly are they then doing in Norway? Well, they're buying white appliances, for instance. So this is a really nice experiment performed by or conducted by Green Nudge in Norway, which took a look at how people select and shop for white appliances. One particular thing they noticed was that we tend to buy the low-cost dryer when faced with the choice of a low-cost dryer and an expensive dryer. This is a problem because if you add lifetime cost, this is not a good choice for the consumer, nor is it a good choice for the environment. In fact, it's not even a good choice for the shop, in this case Elgiganten or Elkjøp, because they could have been selling a more expensive machine. So what they did was, in this experiment, was to the standard, really weird thing coming from the EU, mainly, they added the lifetime costs next to the actual selling cost of the white appliance, in this case a tumble dryer. People actually had to add the numbers themselves, and remember, these are numbers in the far future, so they're actually discounted to an extent. But still, when you look at this and then you look at the experiment and you get the numbers, it's a bit difficult to see from a nice graph like this, but actually, on average, the appliances leaving the store during the the experiment was not 4.9% more energy effective, just by adding a sticker. So this is some of the stuff they're doing in Norway. It's really interesting, and I know they're working together with the Behavioral Insights team. And then we have Sweden, and we all love the Swedes. And so I know something has been happening in Stockholm. I've been there twice. And somebody's writing a report in Lund. That's it. And then we have Denmark. 3 years ago, we began something called the Danish Nudging Network. So Denmark looks more or less like this. We started here, and now it looks like this. This is the efforts that are made where nudging has been written explicitly into municipality programs or governmental programs. I'm not saying they always know what they're doing, and that's not good, but people are very eager to learn about this and apply this. So why did we get that success in Denmark besides just creating a network? Well, the most straightforward answer might be that the network option was very well fitted to deal with some particular Nordic problems when it comes to organization in the state. Namely that we have a bottom-up culture in state organization. It makes us slow. We have very flat hierarchies, so we often find that any kind of change needs to have ownership within the organization. Then we have public sensibility. It's not like in the States. Here, if the politicians do something, people actually, they don't only get angry, they also do something about it very often. And then we have a consensus culture which calls for compromise even if you're in power. And if you have read Daniel Kahneman, you can see this is very system 2 rational way of organizing a society, and it's really nice. But it do create some problems, and that was what we wanted to work with when we created this network. This is the really angry core team of the network. It amounts to the British Behavioral Insights team. We're just a bit more young and handsome. And this team is also different in other ways. For one thing, it's established by a collaboration between my center and Roskilde University. And we do make research, but we do a particular kind of research which is labeled guerrilla research, meaning that actually we're not staying at the university. We're in the jungle training the locals, meaning that we're sitting in the Danish business authorities and training their people. And we work together with a lot of various public authorities and trains them through various training programs and tries to teach them about the ideas of running experiments and actually using evidence-based or evidence for policymaking. Then we have the network surrounding it. And the network, I think when I wrote that text, it was plus 60, we're plus 90 now. So it's comprised of a lot of companies, organizations, and institutions, which actually lend themselves to being experimental grounds. So if I want to do an experiment on 400 people having a dinner, a 3-course meal with wine, I just call, they're here somewhere. I don't know where they are now. But there's a huge catering company in here, so I just call them up and I say, well, can we set this up? And this is really nice for science. It's also nice for the companies because they have some troubles actually getting into harbor with the CSR politics. And then it's also really nice because we do pro-social stuff. The way we work then is we have this kind of, we have to get all the way around. We have to do theory, organization, methodology, ethics, and applications. And if we begin with theory, we have done a lot of theoretical work, and I will save you for this, but this is just some of the stuff we have done is that we have shown how libertarian paternalism, which is one of the core concepts in some of the books in these topics, is actually separate from the concept of nudging. And various other kinds of things in theory where we have also pointed out that, for instance, transparency is a very good thing when it comes to nudging people in their own interest because it can actually become a driver, which is opposite what happens if you want to sell people something that they actually don't want to buy. Then when it comes to organizations, we have had to organize things very differently in Denmark because we have this bottom-up culture. So we have a center and a team, and then we work within this nexus of public authorities, businesses, and academia. We work with individual agencies and then with all the municipalities. So that's one set of stakeholders which participates in training and master classes and lend themselves to experiments. Then we also actually communicate both with government parties and non-government parties. It works a bit like this. When we have an idea, we put it up not for sale, but for grabs. So if anybody wants it, they can take it. Then we work together with several universities and then also with some universities abroad. And then, of course, companies. And we have had to align with several companies because we have our books full for the next 4 years. So we need some companies to take some of the pressure for us and to work together with these plus 80. Now they are plus 19 companies, which are sorted into various areas. And this is a little look into what we're doing currently. This is from the last 12 months or so. You can see some of the results up here. It's minus 46% on street littering, non-compliance for business permits 15%, errors in business registration minus 43%. Doing various kinds of experiments where we go in. We do law proposals, outreach, advice, and so on and so on and so on. So it's a very, very fluid structure that we're running, where we're doing a lot of different things. When it comes to methodology, we have some methodologies from academia, which turns out not to be complete stories of what goes on in policymaking. So one of the things we see done quite a lot in organizations is that they try to read some behavioral economics or COXI experiments, and then they try to apply them as solutions to some domain. So this is more or less like if you entered the doctor's office and you were coughing and he said, I've read about some medicines, let's try them on you without diagnosing you. And we see a lot of that happening, especially in consultants companies, small consultants companies, that they do these kinds of errors sometimes with bad consequences. Then there's another strategy where policymakers turn up with some kind of a problem and there is an organizational understanding of what the problem is, and then you go all the way over, read some experiments, and then you try to apply them as solutions. And this is, if you use this strategy, you really need to do this kind of run multiple experiments multiple groups in an experiment at a time, because you're not quite certain about what goes on amongst the citizens when they're faced with a certain problem or piece of communication. And we work in a bit different, very slow way where we do what we call a baseline. We do first some stuff on behavior, then we do a lot of diagnosis analysis. Actually, then we go forth and back here for years, and then we get to do the solution in the end in the experiment. And we use and develop certain experimental diagnosis tools that you usually won't see in the behavioral economics journals, but basically it's tools taking the process from an unstructured one and carrying it all the way to a very structured one where you can do the right experiments in the end. And then, of course, there are the ethics. The ethical question keeps on showing its heads, and that's really, really nice. So I'm so fortunate to have a degree in philosophy, and two other people at the team also have master degrees in philosophy besides the other degrees they have. And some of the ethical questions were some of the first things that we threw ourselves at to begin with, because they're the same again and again in all countries. And I would just advise you to read this paper called Nudge and the Manipulation of Choice, a framework for responsible use of the nudge approach to behavior change in public policy. Because I don't think there's not an answer for some of your questions in there, for all of your questions, I actually think. So some of the stuff which is usually said is nudge is just the same thing as marketing. No, because we can actually act according to people's preferences. So we can tap into their long-term interests. And we can use that to get people what we call doing upstream nudging rather than just downstream nudging. There are also arguments out there saying pro-nudging, that we're always being nudged in no matter what context we're in. And that is not the case either. And all these kinds of arguments might mislead you while you work on this. And so it's a really, really, I think it's a really good paper. I wrote it, by the way. And there's also stuff like when Thaler and Sunstein and behavioral economists says, yes, sometimes they have a tongue slip and they say, well, this is about the manipulation of choice, then often it's because within an economic model, everything is defined as a choice. So if I do something by habit, it's a choice if there's a choice node in the decision tree. And then we can sort various kinds of nudges using the framework provided in this paper into some categories. Actually, this is some shorthand categorization, but you categorize the functions of each choice whether according to whether they're mainly interacting with what is called reflective thinking or intuitive or automatic thinking, and whether they're transparent in the situation and not. And this is very important if you want to discuss whether we are putting responsibilities in the hands of citizens or whether we're actually trying to make it easier for them to just reach other goals they have. And then, in the end, there are the applications. So I'm just going to show you how different things you can do when you work with applied behavioral science. So next time you're in Kastrup or Copenhagen Airport, you'll notice that you won't be as much in risk of passive smoking as you used to. This is from an experiment that we just did where we more than halved the risk factors from passive smoking. This is basically a drop in the number of people smoking in non-smoking zones in a public area. And this result is obtained by dressing up as travelers and staying a whole summer in the airport. And then coming up with solutions where we use priming inside the terminals because we have huge data sheets saying where people come from and so on. We put these stickers onto the floor. We move benches around. We move dustbins around. And then we put this stuff up. And suddenly, smoking zones that didn't work before in other places, they work in the airport now. So this is just when you land in Copenhagen Airport. If you go to Copenhagen, you'll find these dustbins with green footprints. These are the result of an experiment where we handed out thousands of caramels, and then we tried to find all the paper again. And after doing that, we did it again, but had put footprints on the ground. And then the result, here you can see the red numbers or the red percentages of the percentages of caramel papers found in wrong places is quite a nice drop. And when they implemented this all over town, they had an immediate drop of 40% in street littering. And this is very, very crude, basic cognitive psychology. It's really not that exciting. It's just quite easy and fun to do if you like to find caramel papers. Then you might know of studies showing that if you decrease the size of plates, people will eat less. And we also did the one on food waste, like they did in Norway as well, and had a reduction of 26% in food waste in a standard field experiment. So these are just regular stuff, and it can earn companies a lot of money, so they're pretty hooked on playing around. Then when we get into the public sector, we have an example like this. This is something called in Danish næringsbrev. This is a permit that you have to have if you're selling food as a company. And a lot of companies, they don't respond to this. So there's some pretty severe incentives or sanctions coming in if you don't respond to it, but a lot of people don't respond, a lot of companies don't respond. Actually, you get a fine at around 1,500 euros the first time you fail to respond. And for small companies, that's a lot of money. And the letter says so, and this letter you send after you have had a visit by people in your company, saying, a bunch of public servants, officials saying that you need this permit, we're going to send you this letter, and if you don't respond to it, you'll get a huge fine. And people, they don't respond, even despite of this. So what we did was just to take exactly the same sentences, more or less, and just put them up in a different way. The changes are very, very simple. We wrote the name of the person receiving the letter. We used something called cognitive dissonance reduction, which is about, it's a long story, but this is rather than asking people, should you have this permit, just saying that this is the reason why you get this letter. Then we used a highlighter. Everybody can do this, right? And then something we are pretty bad at in public administration is telling people how to do what they should do. Instead, we just tell them what they should end up having done. But this is just telling them how they should do it. And this is from the control, this is the response rate, this is the compliance rate, those actually taking up the permit. And when we send out the new letter, we have an increase of 10 percentage points on both parameters. And this amounts, because they haven't counted yet, because it's always difficult to get people to count this stuff, but someone has said to me this amounts to approximately 1,000 court cases not being run because of changing this letter. Because the sample size of this is actually 14,000 companies. And you can see here we have a continuous effect, and then we have various variations that should work from other areas in the literature, but actually doesn't work in this case, which just again shows that we need to do experiments all the time in order to be sure that it works. We did business registration. This is actually the process you have to go through in Denmark to have your business registered. And a lot of people made mistakes or called up the call lines. We did an experiment where we actually, this is actually the solution, I'm going to tell you about that another day, but where we increased the correctness of these registrations by 15 percentage points, but just by reformulating questions. We have written proposals for organ donation and then also done something in pensions. So there's so much to do, even, or perhaps because we have a huge welfare state in the Nordic countries. There's a lot of things where we can just tap into it, but it does require that you know something about it and you have knowledgeable people conducting the experiments and devising the interventions. So this is what I just had to tell you about what goes on in the Nordic countries, and I hope it inspired you just a little bit, either to go out and find some caramel papers or eat less cake or do some experiments. So thank you. Okay, yeah. I won't go away.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Hansen. Now it's your turn. Over there.
Thank you for the nice presentation. I'm Ari Hakkan. I'm working in the social psychology and health psychology field. And I was just wondering, what is this nudge word here meaning? That, for example, here we have it in a health behavioral change area. There is a behavioral change techniques that we are trying to make intervention. So if I label this as a kind of how to create behavioral change, different techniques, and that's one, and of course the showing how the policy works is an own field as well. So how do you describe what this nudge means? Is it that connection between policymakers and science, or what will happen if we just put in Finland behavior evidence-based policy thing or something like that and drop the nudge? Are we out of network or?
No, you'll be fine, first of all. The nudge concept became very popular because it was launched as a part of a really nice agenda, pointing out that there is a certain set of interventions which actually has an effect without limiting our choices or using more provision of information or adjusting incentives. So it's basically just a term calling attention to the fact that there's a lot of factors influencing our behavior and choices that shouldn't actually do it in principle but does in practice. And before we had that concept, and if we just talked about applied behavioral science beforehand, then when you enter the room, I have a lot of examples of this, but if you enter the room in a company, or if you enter a room in a state agency, and you said, I actually think we should take into consideration that people might not do what we ask them to do, but something else. And the response would be something like, well, then it's their own fault, right? We did what we should do. Because if we assume that agents are really rational and really good at calculating and processing information and taking the right choices and acting on them, acting on plans and so on, then the citizens should be in harbor now. But if we shift the assumptions that this is not the case for how people are, then you can no longer wash your hands in that way in public administration. And the nudge word is a way of calling attention to the fact that there is a lot of these factors that need to be taken into account when we devise public policies.
Thanks. That was fascinating. I'm just puzzled. Why has Denmark done so much relative to the other Nordic countries?
Well, I think the answer is that we started. It's nothing else than that we started running before them. It's a series of coincidences. I had to do a lot of work together with people from physics, and that wasn't really exciting. And then I happened to have a PhD degree in microeconomics, and I knew Bob Sugden, who doesn't like nudge that much. And then we set out to do it because we needed something to do in the center. I think that's a purely historical coincidence. And then we saw that they were taking a lot of heat in the UK at that time on the whole discussion about manipulation and ethics. And we thought, well, we'll do it in another way. So we've decided to work bottom up. That's not the only solution. That's not the only way, but that's also a way that you can use. I actually think the best way would be to merge the two of them, having public support to a larger extent than we have, and then more bottom-up driven processes. Because one of the things that we find all the time is that politicians tend to put a brake into what we do. So the two law proposals we have, actually they're stopped in Parliament because they disagree about who should propose them in Parliament. That's really annoying. And then the other thing is that as soon as the politicians sometimes see that what we intend to do is to run around cafeterias and find out various kinds of input to health staff at schools for how to serve food, it's like, well, then it's not that exciting anymore. So I think there's good things from both sides. It's a bottom-up, for me, it's a bottom-up strategy, but it needs to be run from the top.
From the right side.
Hi, I'm Jonas. Thanks for the interesting presentation. My question or comment concerns kind of the ethics of the nudge. You mentioned at the beginning that there is this idea that nudge is something that doesn't constrain the choice set of people and doesn't kind of put extra costs on people's behavior. But the thing is that this research and this policy is happening at this behavioral level, but still it kind of exploits the knowledge about people's cognitive abilities. Has there been any discussion about this kind of not just behavioral costs, but also that there might be some kind of cognitive costs? I don't know if this is quite clear, but people's cognitive abilities produce this kind of behavioral actions, but then I think you also have to take into account this kind of possible cognitive costs. You can't just take advantage of these cognitive abilities and then say that because at the behavior level we are not limiting people's choices, then it's totally okay. I confess that my notion of cognitive costs might be a bit unclear.
I can hear three questions in what you're saying, and they're all very sensible. One of them it pertains to learning. Do we become worse at conducting good choices if we make everything easy? That was the smallest question you had in there. When we get good at doing one thing, we just turn our attention to something else. Like when we went from DOS programming of our computers to Microsoft interfaces. Then there is the idea of cognitive cost, and some of these things rely on. So if you want to fit this into revealed preference theory, and you want to push the social psychological concepts into that theory, then you can conceptualize them as cognitive costs. But this is a bit technical. I'm sorry for this. It's a technical mistake. But if you use that concept, then things that actually works in nudging both would be cognitive costs and cognitive benefits within revealed preference theory. So it wouldn't be a one-way conclusion. And then, in general, this thing you mentioned about taking away people's choices, I think you touched upon a very interesting thing, because it's one thing to say that we haven't taken away choices in principle, but doing it in practice, knowing how people act. So that's one of the reasons, for instance, why we oppose defaulting people into organ donation, because that's too important a question to default people into. So we might say that they still have the choice to opt out, but we know they won't. And we have the option of using prompts like it was shown earlier today. So that is what we should go from a behavioral perspective informed by ethics.
Thanks. We have time for one more question before we go to the panel part of the seminar.
If nobody wants to ask, there's one.
There's one.
So this would be a bit of a question to both Gus and Pelle. So in some sense, the approaches that has been adopted in the UK and Denmark are very, very different in the sense that in the UK you have a very strong government backing, while in Denmark, as you say, it's a bottom-up approach. So I mean, how would you sort of see the benefits and the pros and cons with these two approaches? Maybe this is a bit of a question for both of you.
Well, yeah. For instance, when I look at the UK model, what I miss, and when I talk to Owen and David, is more training of staff to create an actual change of tactics in the way the state functions on ground level. Also because a lot of, you saw the percentages we have, sometimes they're big, and one of the things we have noticed is that the closer to the situation we get, the bigger they get, so there's some kind of cost-benefit analysis to do there. But that also means that when you roll out, if you work together with people, with front staff, they often have knowledge about things that provides just the right insight for you as a behavioral researcher or behavioral economist to see what a really elegant solution could be. And that's often where we decide to opt for tape and stickers rather than loss aversion, knowing that both could work, but tape is so much cheaper.
Just from the UK point of view, first of all, it's worth saying that a lot of the stuff done by the Behavioural Insight team ends up being about individuals. So it's not just kind of either central or local, it's empowering individuals and thinking about things which might help at that level. Secondly, there was a very, very good question about culture, and just as cultures change between countries, and so the right solutions are different in different countries, actually the more you go to the local level, the more you realise that cultures can change even within communities or within local areas. So I'm very strongly in favour of the approach you were pushing, that actually you can get some really good solutions at a local level. So the ideal would be really to go at both. And I was just sitting at the centre, so I got on with the centre. But I think there's a lot to be said for trying to incentivise. And it's really, to me, bizarre, because one of the real motivating factors for why the centre was doing it is because, I didn't push this enough, behaviour change ideas generally are very cheap. Now, we have gone through massive budget cuts, centrally and locally. And it's interesting how some of those local cuts you would have thought would have generated the demand to, well, why aren't we doing more of this? And I hope that will start to come through. In some cases, it is. We've got some of our agencies, for example, where there was a classic one where we have an agency that its job is to help small businesses to register their intellectual property, right, to the patents people, so that it's not stolen by somebody else, so their idea can be kept, right? And they managed, the way they got at this is they had a big marketing budget to go out to small businesses to explain that they were there and why they should do this. When the new government came in, they just, fairly crude policy, they abolished marketing, right? We had no money for marketing, so they weren't allowed to do any marketing that cost money. So the way they got around this was to start putting links to their websites onto the website of a program called Dragon's Den. Do you have Dragon's Den here? Which is basically a kind of program about small business entrepreneurs, innovators trying to come up with new ideas and a panel deciding if they get them or not. By doing that link into the program, they got more hits through that than they got through their marketing. And it cost them nothing. So actually what happened was no money equals necessity is the mother of invention. They became more innovative and creative. And it was a kind of local solution. It was the people on the ground thinking about this in a different way, because they got removed from them. This is where a choice was removed, the option, simple option of working with a marketing company.
I'd like to ask one question, if we still have time for that.
Well, for you, but
or move on.
I think we could move on. Looks like our panel started the discussion already, so let's invite them to take their seats. Let's also invite State Secretary Olli-Pekka Heinonen to join the discussion. And we'll let Otto his question.
That's good. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh, you mean to get rid of the slide?
Well,
all right. So my name is Vicky. I'm the Advocacy Director for DANC. At the same time, my day job, I work for the Behavioural Insights team in London. We've heard a lot about the work that the team has done. I work there as an advisor, currently working on projects with local authorities, so local government. We heard the view a couple of times that British approach is very much central government. I think that's currently changing, and there's a lot more grassroots work taking place. That's enough about me. I would like to once more welcome the State Secretary, Olli Pekka-Heinonen. I doubt he needs any introductions. He has been Minister for several years, Minister of Transport and Minister of Education, and today here to give us some views on how we can bring behavioural science approaches to public policy into Finland. So without further ado, I've got some questions prepared. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some more questions from the audience, as they did seem very fruitful. Maybe a question to kick the panel off, and all of you feel free to just take a word when you have something to say. What would you see would be the best way to foster or to support a culture of testing in Finland?
Okay, fine. May start. First of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this event, because I think this is one of the best ways to kind of make sure that the cultural change is happening also in Finland. It's a question of understanding, spreading the knowledge, what we're talking about. And I would say, from my experience, that we are still at a very early phase in the general discussion and also kind of practical level actions also. What would be the best way to change the culture? I think there is kind of things still bubbling under in Finland. That there's a lot, and has been for some years now, a lot of discussion about testing and experimenting. A very kind of positive approach. The future committee of the parliament has made a report on it, and there are kind of different ways. The white paper on future from the government side took up this thing as a big issue. And there are some other issues also inside the ministerial administration. There's a group of active civil servants who have created this kind of a change agent or change makers network, and the things that they have been working together, there's a lot in contact with kind of using also the behavioral economics as a way of doing things. But I would say the best thing is that there would be some ownership on the issue, and there would be, I would say, a lot of also activism on the local level, which you were referring to, because in Finland the municipalities, they play a very strong role, and quite often the new things in Finland also start from the municipality level, and I definitely hope that there would be kind of active people on that level taking this kind of things into use. I'm a strong supporter myself of this approach, and I see that it's important to kind of connect this with a wider kind of change process of increasing the kind of evidence-based knowledge, evidence-based decision making, and doing it so that it's not an idea that the politicians are doing things, that they have the kind of knowledge to know everything, and then they kind of steer the citizens, but seeing the kind of public service as working on the same side of the table with citizens, making changes. And it's very interesting to hear the Danish experience. And I think there is a small difference between Denmark and Finland. I think you are more of a kind of a bottom-up society, that we have kind of some characteristics of kind of top-down policy steering especially, which is something that we have to kind of change on our way of utilizing these possibilities.
Just one point to add. I mean, yes, by all means do it at individual and local and community level, there'll be some things at national level. But actually we are all in Europe affected by EU directives and regulations which are at that supranational level. And wouldn't it be nice if we kind of felt that those were driven by a behavioural understanding? Now we get into the cultural issues about the behavioural understandings might be different in each nation state, but we know that there are some cultural commonalities, and I would like to see us thinking about in Brussels getting the new commission when they're in place to actually start to think about, okay, so we've got a renewables objective. Well, what kind of initiatives should we be having of a behavioural kind, and what are the behavioural kind of thoughts behind the regulations that quite often come down as being from above and kind of Europe imposing, as opposed to Europe assisting and allowing us to come to better answers?
Yes, I think we haven't heard much about what the European Union or the European Commission Behavioural Insights team is doing. They do exist, I believe, I have been told, so waiting to hear. Any more comments on this?
Perhaps I could comment this a little bit. So, I mean, I come from the academic side, and we in academia we work in close cooperation with, for instance, Government Institute of Economic Research and kuluttajatutkimuslaitos and so on and so forth. And these are kind of the expertise on when it comes to randomized control trials that lies there, and they have also strong incentives to produce sort of high quality, high impact research in, for instance, in economics. So I think that those are the kind of institutions that at least could play a key role in helping this taking place. Of course, their financing is a key issue somehow. That how we could sort of pull out resources to try out these control trials. And then I think that the cost-benefit analysis is also a key issue, at least when it comes to top-down approach and thinking about what are the key sort of domains where we could expect to have a high impact in terms of social change and so on. So this is probably something that also in the UK you have been thinking about a lot.
I think a potential heavy-handed approach, which I think may have been adopted by the Obama administration, would be to have a requirement that when new policies are being considered, that along with the policies being proposed, some kind of evaluation would be proposed at the same time, and an evaluation plan. And then taking that to the next level, you could imagine that there would also be a requirement for some kind of innovative process for the policy to be refined over time. So I did think it would be possible to institutionalize the process. I don't think you'd necessarily want to do it with requiring RCTs, randomized controlled trials, because very often alternative methodologies can be successful. But it seems like you shouldn't introduce seriously new policies without thinking about how you're going to evaluate whether they are successful and to think about how to improve them.
Maybe if I may still comment on this, I think one sort of key issue might be exactly the sort of ownership issue that, in medicine recently, big medical companies have been criticized for their sort of trials, and they have strong incentives to produce sort of positive results when it comes to drugs. And maybe we have a bit of similar trouble here. Early on, people were referring to the fact that, at least politicians have a strong incentive if they suggest something that they want to see it succeed. So in that sense, I mean, perhaps when we think about, who should be promoting this and taking initiative in producing these trials, we should think that it should be sort of sufficiently independent body so that we can be confident about our sort of findings somehow. I'm not sure how you see other.
The issue in the UK was very clear. I spent a lot of my time trying to say, particularly politicians in their manifestos pre-election and in what they were trying to do, to emphasise what are the outcomes they were looking for, not necessarily to go into enormous detail about the how, because we could then experiment on the how. But quite often they said, no, we are going to improve educational outcomes because we are going to introduce lots more free schools, right, as one example. Now, we hadn't ever tested the free schools, so that may work brilliantly or not, but it was kind of, if they could have said, we're looking to find different ways to achieve better educational outcomes in terms of exam results and overall broader education, etc. And so specified what they want to do in terms of outcomes and gave you a bit more room in terms of how to go off and experiment. And then, the politician will get the gain because what you would introduce then will be more successful in terms of achieving the outcome they wanted. It's quite often there's a lot of pressure to be very specific, isn't there? And the political process throws that up.
In some sense, you're talking about the target function, that it should be broadly said, what is the target? Yes. But maybe not only what we can achieve, but also what it takes to achieve that. That should be also part of the target somehow. That it again goes back to the cost benefit. Right.
So to push the question of ownership a little bit further, especially I guess for those who know the Finnish context very well, would you draw the conclusion that there is a need to create kind of Finnish behavioural insights team? And if so, within which institution and who should pay for it? Of course, not specifically aimed at the State Secretary.
Well, if I may start, though, I don't anymore believe in the way that we would say that let's integrate this with all departments and all the ministries and everybody's doing their share and everything is going fine. I used to believe, but not anymore, and I think we do need a kind of a center to have the ownership. I think the center's task needs to be not to kind of control everything, but to kind of spread the idea and to make sure that there's kind of supporting elements from their side so that things can happen in different ministries and that there's a culture that gets creating, that kind of gets going on. Of course, from my point of view, maybe it would be a natural thing that pretty close to the Prime Minister's office there would be an ownership in this kind of questions.
Yeah, I have an idea, and I'm very curious about your reaction to it, since you were very instrumental in setting up the Behavioral Insights team. But I had a lot of interactions with the team for the first part of the year before they went private or whatever, and it seemed to me that there was an issue, which is that they were separate from all of the different ministries, so they had to kind of go to the ministries and try to get the ministries to buy into their program. And it seemed like there was some often reluctance, because like, why should we let these outsiders into our organization? And really all they had going for them was some new ideas, and that they were very clever, talented individuals. And so I was wondering whether it would be a more successful model to embed like small nudge units within ministries. Maybe there'd be some kind of overarching framework. So a few people who didn't have any particular portfolios who oversaw the whole enterprise. But I'm wondering about your reaction, given that you created it the way it was and you've observed it over time.
Well, we've been. It's a very, very good question. I've personally been very attracted to this area for quite a while and was trying to get my other permanent secretaries running their departments to be as interested as I was. And to be honest, I wasn't succeeding very well. Because, as you say, there are a lot of issues about the status quo. I mean, just changing the signature on the tax form still hasn't happened because it's a software problem and it's a few £1 million cost tag to do it, and so that's quite a big thing. And some of the bigger things are quite expensive. So what we decided to do was just say, actually, look, I know this is going to work. I'm going to set it up at the centre, and I'm basically going to be something of a bully. And in the end, I'm the boss of all the other perm secs. And if I say, actually, we're going to do this, we're going to have this experiment in job centres, we're going to do a randomised control trial, and we're going to have the ground floor doing this and the upstairs doing something different to improve job search. And so we managed to get most of these through. We did them with revenue and customs, the tax authorities. But I regard this as a transition. I mean, this is not a first best position to be. So what I'm hoping is that they will see that these things work, and we're very careful now to try and give ownership. So when we talk about the tax letters thing, we spend a lot of time saying revenue and customs decided to do this, particularly within the UK system, to kind of give them the credit. Mm-hmm. And I think success will be when they start coming up with these ideas, and then the role of BIT will switch from being the ideas generator to the fielder of the ideas that come in from local authorities, from think tanks, from departments, and then they kind of say, well, here's how someone's done this in Denmark or Singapore, here's how we can help you on setting up the randomised control trial. So in that sense, they become a central core source. But I think to kick-start it, you actually needed to literally do that, kick-start it. So tank is a very good name. I was thinking it was a bad name, but you need a bit of tank about you to push it forward and start.
Thank you. I know we had quite a few academics with us earlier today. They may have been scared by all this talk about policy and administration and things like that. We know academics aren't always so good at engaging with. So my question, I guess, to especially Topi, but also other kind of academics on the panel, is what would you see as the role of researchers in going towards civil servants, in a way, stretching out that hand and saying, we can do some things with you. And my sense of some of my work in academia has been that academics are quite happy just staying in their department and not, in a way, engaging too much. That might not be a representative perception.
Yeah. When it comes to economics, at least, which is something that I know, I mean, the incentives are there. I mean, but this would be taking place under the conditions of the academics, in the sense that if they can choose freely where to go somehow, that then they would choose the projects which have the high impact, publication prospects and so on and so forth. So I mean, that might not be of interest for societal impact. That might not be the best project, but I'm sure that there is, field experiments and natural experiments. This is known to be the kind of the best way of sort of identifying causal effects, and that's the best research setting you can think of, which then publish best. So I mean, the incentives from the researcher side in that way are in place, but of course, if it's the researchers who get to select, then they select in their own terms those projects that are important from them.
Well, since I'm the director of a center called Initiative for Science, Society and Policy, I think I have to say something. And that would be originally the center which we established, and when I became director, the idea was how to get academics out and interact with society to inform society. That's a very academic thought. That we should come from the universities and teach the rest of societies how to do everything, right? And what has happened quite quickly since I took over is basically rethinking that I think academia has more to learn from society and societal practices than society has to learn from academia. And I'm only talking by experience now. I'm sorry to say for the fellow researchers and academics, but when I enter, first of all, we have almost no academics in our network from Denmark. They're running from all across the Europe. They're coming. They're asking if they can participate. But those in Denmark, they're not very fond of the idea, and there is one reason, namely that in academia, vanity is the main driver. So the idea of something happening, and you're not part of that from the beginning or enjoying it full throttle, can easily scare academics away. At least in Denmark, I've been told the same thing goes for Sweden and the US and the UK by other people. And I think we have to when we talk about how academics should be involved in this, I see something interesting about the behavioral insights team because you have academics there. You have David Halpern, who's director, but he's not just a purely academic in the traditional sense. So I see next to this issue, I see a need, if we really want to get academia and society to benefit from each other, we also need to rethink not only how public policy should work, but also how certain academics, not all academics, but how certain academics should work.
My view is, as I said earlier, it's getting this stuff off the ground, getting this kind of work off the ground is very, very difficult. There's a lot of impediments. And so often, as an academic, you invest a lot in some kind of a project, and then it hits some kind of a roadblock after you've invested a lot of time and effort in it. And my experience is it has to be the government agency or the company that not only reaches out to the academic, but shows a pretty high level of commitment. If you as an academic go and reach out to a government or a government ministry or to a company, you might possibly get in the door, but you're never going to get a project happening. The commercial entity or the ministry has to have, as the English expression goes, skin in the game. And it's better if they have invested their own time and money in it. So I don't think there's much prospect for academics reaching out to government or to businesses. It's got to come the other direction.
Thank you, George. I think we're running out of time. I would like to invite one question from the audience. I believe there was one. Is that one still waiting to be voiced? So let's have one question, and then please do stay with us after 5. We've got some time and some drinks, so we can continue these discussions. But last question.
Yeah. So my question was specifically for Pelle, who was on the stage at the time. Okay, I'll shout. This one doesn't work. So can you describe your first project? How was it easy to convince the first partner to finance the research and let you set an RCT up for them? And has that changed over the 4 years? Now that you have 90 partners, or how many was it? Do you now have kind of a fame, reputation around Denmark that you can just walk in any door and just say, we're going to fix this thing?
Any door. I can tell you that, first of all, we have one of our main slogan at the team is just do it. So what happens when we get an idea is that very non-academic, we don't sit down and write an application for three months. We just walk out the door and we go to a restaurant and say, hey, we think we have the solution for how to get people to bring back a doggy bag from the restaurant. And that's where we begin. And then we find out how we're going to finance the stuff afterwards. And yes, it has become more and more easy to get it done. But we have had to adopt a rule saying that from design thinking, saying that what we do today we get nothing for, but tomorrow's project will pay for today, from today's project. So it's much easier now. But in the beginning, the first thing that happened was we were not allowed to put up green footprints on the street, right? So what do? You do it anyway, right? and basically that's it. It's groundwork, and then it becomes more and more easy. It will take a long process. But what I'm sometimes a bit afraid of is that if we don't multiply in some way, if we don't teach our skills to some extent to those working in public offices, then we can come and change a letter, run a nice experiment, then we can walk off again. But and that would be nice for that single letter. But in order to really achieve what can be achieved, we also need additional strategies.
I have a follow-up also to this. So
I knew it was a trick question.
All of you, thank you by the way for a very good presentation. You talked about successful experiments, great successes. How many zero results do you get? What's the ratio? And do you possibly publish those?
Yeah, well, I could just say, when I put up those examples, you'll see a number of them. One of the ideas was worse than the control. So, yes, we've had lots of things where it's turned out that the idea we were pushing turned out to be worse than doing nothing. Yeah, plenty. And in general, we've been quite open about them. There's a Behavioural Insight team has a blog, and they put out various results. I think it's quite important that we're quite open about that.
I think it's important to go beyond being open about it. And so a lot of the work that I do is in the medical realm. And in the United States, if you want to publish in a medical journal, you have to have registered the clinical trial before you started data collection. If you didn't, you will not get published in a medical journal. So basically, we register all of our trials before we even begin data collection. And so there's a record, a public record, of everything that we did. And we're really expected to publish all studies somewhere if they worked or they didn't. And I think that's a model that the social sciences should be adopting. After all, we have to apply for human subjects approval for our studies, and it would be incrementally very small effort to register these studies publicly when we apply for human subjects approval.
Kind of, from my point of view, also the kind of trials that lead up to an result where, for example, the outcome is worse than the control groups, I think they're very valuable too. Because with them you know much more than before, that you could have assumed something, but after you've done it, you know what works and what doesn't work, and that's very valuable knowledge.
Yeah, I was raising my hand before because I'm getting 0 results all the time, right, these weeks. So, so we tried to do some stuff on parking tickets, or the reminders for parking tickets, using all the standard. So one of the things when you work in a network with partners, then you have to listen to what they say, and it's really annoying, but also nice. So one of the things we're not allowed to is to write in harsh language to people which have been reminded 4 times about not paying their parking tickets. And then we have tried now all the various kinds of things that we know usually would work, and none of it works.
We've got a similar one, and we found one that did work, which was this is people that hadn't paid their car tax. So there's a little symbol that you have to display in a car, and we tried all sorts of letters and all the rest of it. The one that worked was we sent them a photo, and I think what happened then was they realised they'd been caught, and therefore we got a much higher
But it is very. So I can just say a final thing. If one to catch the first question and connect it to this, one of the things we experience is that state agencies use a lot of money on marketing companies, ad companies, and communication bureaus and companies. And what I'm sometimes asked to do is to screen their proposals or their offers for a campaign to see whether something a bit like low-key Euro office thing, to screen whether it would actually have a behavioral effect, or whether what is the setup of this campaign. And these companies have become quite good, I think, at optimizing within the usual framework of getting these tasks for government agencies in the way that they set up campaigns, information campaigns, attitude campaigns, and so on, in ways that they can't fail, like, how many clicks on YouTube can we get or something like that. And one of the places that one could really do something about integrating the experimental method is to put up a series of, put in a checklist for people. So when they look over such a proposal, they'll say, you have the information in place, you have the cool fashionistas in place, but you don't have the rest. So this is a bad idea. We're not going to run with that. I think that was something that you could actually add quite easily if you want to integrate these insights into your everyday work. And then you should really be aware, and that was the reason I thought of it, these companies, they send in proposals which cannot fail. And what becomes really annoying if you go into this market like you've done with the Behavioral Insights team of privatizing, then you have to go into an office saying that we have perhaps a 50% chance of failing. And then you have to go up against somebody who comes with something which can't fail. And if the other person sitting on the other side of the table, who are going to select what to do, are mostly concerned about not failing, then you have the problem in integrating this kind of approach in public policy.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're coming to the end of our seminar. I would like to just say one more thing on the trial where people got sent an image of their car saying, we know which car you're driving, you should really hurry up and pay now. Apparently the French authorities also did something similar, but they had to actually cancel this policy because it turned out what was happening was that this image of the car was being mailed to homes. It was mostly the wives opening the letters and finding out that their husbands were driving cars with other people. So this was not very successful in France, but it's done better in the UK. I'd like to extend a warm thank you to all of our panelists and to the audience. Thank you for coming.
Time for the official thanks from my side, and on behalf of the entire tank team, Tiina, Noora, Mikko, Otto, and Marika, we want to sincerely express our gratitude to our international guests for coming all the way to Finland and sharing your passion and your knowledge and expertise about the topic. I'd also like to thank our honorable Finnish guests, Topi and Olli-Pekka Heinonen, for sharing their time and expertise with us. The reason I'm calling Topi is that he has taught me some economics back in the days. We are also very grateful for all of our sponsors who made this event possible. We would like to especially thank Hanken School of Economics, who invited us to use this great venue. Before letting you enjoy some refreshments and sharing your thoughts with each other, there are two things I'd like to share with you based on what we have learned today. So only two things. First, policy is for people. Use the latest knowledge about how people really behave when dealing with complex social issues and when creating public policies and interventions. Second, Test it before you invest time and money in new solutions. What works in the UK or in your head doesn't necessarily work the same way in Finland or in Kerala. The context matters, understand it. So, use behavioral insights. Collect evidence and understand it. Reap the benefits. Keep the quiet revolution going. Thank you.